This episode of Chains is sponsored exclusively by Charlie Foxtrot Brewing. Ask for beers from this veteran-owned brewery and tap rooms across Southwest Florida and Western North Carolina. Thank you for supporting our veterans. Chains, Part 24, by dhonash. Narrated by Vern Henderson. Lying there flat on the bare earth of the damp cellar with about 40 or 50 pounds of rebar strapped to my leg was a huge improvement over being dosed with God knows what and chanted over. This is the first time in probably several days that I hadn't been under the duress of freaks or running from said freaks. I could feel a creeping itch in the places I was injured, where there should have been pain, that periodically radiated to other parts of my body. The alarmingly false thought that it would be safe to rest here nevertheless made getting myself upright a struggle. I crossed over the threshold of the cellar and into the makeshift tunnel. My joints had already started to stiffen up. To my surprise, I could see a light at the end. Not some silly metaphorical one, but a dim, pale light that illuminated the hole in the basement of the barn at the far end of the tunnel. The shadows were disorienting, and a deep ache came from the muscles around my caged leg. I made it a few yards before having to rest. Why was I just now having trouble moving? A sudden swirl hit me as the ache in my head pounded back in full. My stomach twisted in knots, trying in vain to purge the nothing it contained. I didn't understand why everything was coming back, but I knew I wanted to be out of this tunnel. Just as I limped my first step, the light shone toward me, blinded me for a few seconds, and then spun onto the ground. I could see two people struggling against each other, so I started to hurry, thinking that one of them was the woman I'd seen earlier. Eyes adjusted back, I saw one of them bring a cleaver down hard onto the other's head, and then again directly after. I thought to call out to whoever was down there, but the violence in the second shot to the head made me think better of it. I couldn't tell who had won the fight. Plus, even if that was the other prisoner, I certainly wouldn't be any help to her considering the shape I was in. Not that she needed it. Suddenly, the light vanished from the tunnel. I hugged the left-hand wall, moving slowly, cautiously hoping that I'd find a sliced-up freak at the end of the corridor. The absolute darkness heightened my other senses and actually managed to ease the symptoms of my concussion. After a while, I felt the metal frame of my brace hit some loose stonework. I felt around for the corner that would mean I'd reached the end, and lurched over to the dismantled wall in the basement of the barn. I grabbed a section of wall and leaned over in the darkness, feeling around for the person that lost the fight. Sure enough, just a few feet from where I was standing, the still warm wetness of the shaved head confirmed it. The cultist had lost. I did my best to scrape off what I assumed was blood onto the wall and made my way into the chambers below the barn where I was first held as prisoner. My first few steps onto the stone floor of the basement sent chills down my spine, even though this time I was the one making the terrible scraping sounds. The grim memories of my first few hours here tried urgently to burden me before being drowned out by the growing heat and smell of smoke. Someone had definitely done a number on the barn above. I tracked the right side wall until some ambient light from the open metal door above showed the way to the spiral stone steps. As I took my first step, I saw how awkward it was going to be to ascend. I resorted to a half dragging myself up using the handrail with the metal cage banging against each subsequent step. I looked out into the half-smoldering barn, making sure nothing would immediately burn me or collapse, and hobbled through the warm part as fast as I could. I was immediately greeted by the sight of a dead body just outside one of the larger doors. I was surprised to feel a flood of sympathy for the dead man, the one who used to wear this damned cage on his leg, Mr. P. His skull was cracked in several places. I imagine that this was a direct result of him losing our battle. When I first got here, I assumed he was behind all of this insanity, but now, after the fact, I saw that he was just another pawn of Ms. Leah's. I had barely survived my last attempt to shut this all down. But here I was, again, deciding to put an end to it once and for all. Wherever she was, I was going to stop her at all costs. Too many innocent people, too many people at all, had gotten caught up in her twisted, his chosen fantasy, and I'd be damned if I was going to let anyone, especially myself, continue on as a cog in that fucked up machine. As soon as I finished that thought, I felt the ache from my various injuries come back in full force. The throbbing in my head was so suddenly violent that I felt it might crack my skull. I hit the cool earth once again, nearly passing out, and the feeling that I should just stay down washed over me hard. I yearned for the feeling I had while they were drugging me and chanting those stupid words. I yearned for the scintillating relief of the sun and water. I yearned for the lie, but all I had was useless, painful truth. I managed to get my working knee underneath me and used my gelatin arms to shakily hoist myself upright. Here I was, the hero of the day, leaning on a half-burned barn and unable to stand, let alone walk. I immediately lost myself in a fit of laughter at the thought of it. Suddenly, a voice from around the corner of the barn said, "Damn it, boy, I thought you was one of the intruders. What in the hell are you laughing at?" As Ms. Leah herself hustled around the corner, she froze for a split second at the sight of me and moved to raise the gun. My gun, but she was too close. I grabbed her hand with both of mine and spun around to her side, directing the 3 shots she fired away from me and into the berm next to the barn. Once I heard the click of the empty chamber, I swung my fist in a backhand motion which connected with her head. The adrenaline-fueled momentum sent us toppling over each other. As we lay there, with most of my weight still pinning her, through what was probably a broken nose. Now you're ready to fulfill the purpose of a hero." I was disgusted she kept up with the delusion, even severely injured and with her life in another person's hands. I rolled onto my side with the intent of telling her off, but she was already out, her eyes rolling back in her head. After a few deep breaths, and trying in vain to holster my weapon as a matter of muscle memory, I tucked the gun into my rebar leg cage and moved as cautiously as I could toward the house. The uphill climb, as short as it was, took the last of the excited energy out of me, and sure enough, at the end of the climb, my vision was hazy and narrow. That part didn't matter. What mattered was that I had the gun and everyone else was safe. Just as I started to catch my breath, a deep sleep formed from the throb behind my eye. Down I went again in the front yard. I had closed my eyes for a brief moment before hearing the sound of a shotgun fire in the distance. Somehow, not even that mattered. My body was giving in to the hard sleep. I awoke to the sound of a familiar voice in the distance that startled me up from the small divot in the yard that I'd rolled into. The ringing in my ears was so bad that I couldn't make out anything that was being said. To make matters worse, my vision was busted. I could barely make out some dark forms against the yellow-orange background. I blinked a few times and stood up, rubbing my eyes. As I went to speak, I stammered several times before getting out some words that weren't quite the ones I'd chosen. I knew the voice well, but couldn't place it. I approached the shapes and explained that I'd found my gun, and that it would be in their best interest to stand down. Just then, I heard the familiar voice again, followed by some shouting that echoed through my head and sent the ringing in my ears to screaming. I felt myself stumbling forward as I lost my balance again. Then, from somewhere close by, another shotgun blast. I flinched at the sound, but soon found myself laughing again for the same reasons as before. Flimsy old me, after all this, finally doing the hero thing.
This episode is dedicated to the memory of Dale Allen Dhonash.